I never imagined my mother-in-law's high school yearbook would upend my world. But there I was, staring at a faded black and white photo of two teenage girls, one unmistakably my mother, Helen, and the other, Beatrice, my husband's mother. They were classmates and, from the look of it, bitter rivals. "Julia, you've been up here for ages. What are you doing?" Ethan's voice drifted up from downstairs. I snapped the yearbook shut, my heart racing. "Just a minute," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. How could I tell my husband that our mothers shared a past neither of them had ever mentioned? As I descended the stairs of our cozy Victorian, Ethan's concerned face came into view. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Not a ghost exactly, but I think I've stumbled onto a family secret." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Ethan moved to answer it, and I felt my stomach drop as I heard Beatrice's voice. "Darling, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd pop by." She swept into the living room, her designer perfume filling the air. Her eyes landed on me, and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Julia, dear, how quaint you look today." I glanced down at my paint-splattered jeans and oversized sweater, suddenly feeling underdressed in my own home. "Beatrice, what a surprise. We were just about to have lunch. Would you like to join us?" "Oh, I wouldn't dream of imposing," she said, even as she settled herself onto our antique sofa. "I just wanted to remind Ethan about the country club gala next weekend. You'll both be attending, of course?" Ethan shot me an apologetic look. "Actually, Mom, we have plans that weekend. Julia's parents are celebrating their anniversary." Beatrice's lips pursed. "I see. Well, I suppose family obligations must come first, even if they're not quite the same caliber of event." I felt my cheeks flush with anger. "My parents' anniversary is very important to us, Beatrice. I'm sure you can understand that." "Of course, dear," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm sure it will be charming. Now, Ethan, about the new exhibit at your gallery." As Beatrice monopolized the conversation, my mind raced back to the yearbook upstairs. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her disdain for me and my family than simple snobbery. What had happened between her and my mother all those years ago? The afternoon dragged on, with Beatrice making thinly veiled comments about my background and my work at the local art museum. By the time she finally left, I felt drained and on edge. Ethan closed the door behind her with a sigh. "I'm sorry about that, Jules. You know how she can be." I took a deep breath. "Ethan, there's something I need to show you." I led him upstairs and pulled out the yearbook. As I opened it to the page with our mother's photos, Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Is that—" I nodded. "Your mom and mine. They went to school together." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "But why wouldn't they have told us?" "I don't know," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. "But I think it's time we found out." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Sweetie, can you come over? There's something important we need to discuss." I showed Ethan the message, and we shared a look of apprehension. Whatever was going on, it was clear that the past was about to collide with the present in ways we couldn't have imagined. The drive to my parents' house was tense, with Ethan and I lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled up to the familiar yellow bungalow, I noticed Mom pacing on the porch. "Julia, honey," she called, wringing her hands. "I'm so glad you're here. We need to talk." I exchanged a glance with Ethan before following Mom inside. Dad was sitting in his armchair looking worried. "What's going on?" I asked, my stomach churning. Mom took a deep breath. "We've been invited to a reunion party at the Holbrook estate next weekend. Beatrice's home." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Mom, I found your old yearbook. You and Beatrice went to school together, didn't you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Dad spoke up. "Helen, it's time to tell her the truth." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. We should have told you long ago. Beatrice and I, we have a history. A bad one." Before she could continue, the doorbell rang. Dad went to answer it, and I heard a familiar, grating voice. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Beatrice swept into the living room, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. A little family gathering? How quaint. Ethan stood up, his face flushed. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Beatrice ignored him, focusing on my mother instead. "Hello, Helen. It's been a long time." The tension in the room was palpable. Mom straightened her spine, meeting Beatrice's gaze. Not long enough, apparently. Beatrice's laugh was cold. Oh, come now. Surely you're not still holding a grudge after all these years? Water under the bridge, isn't it? What grudge? I demanded, looking between the two women. What happened between you two? Beatrice turned to me, her smile sharp. Oh, didn't your mother tell you? She stole the love of my life right out from under me, and now history seems to be repeating itself. I felt like I'd been slapped. What are you talking about? Julia, Ethan said, his voice strained. Maybe we should go. No, I said firmly. I want to hear this. Beatrice's eyes glittered with malice. Your mother was always so good at playing the innocent, but she knew exactly what she was doing when she seduced Thomas away from me. That's not true, Mom burst out. Thomas chose me, Beatrice. He never loved you. Lies, Beatrice hissed. And now your daughter has ensnared my son here just like you did. I felt my anger rising. I didn't ensnare anyone. Ethan and I love each other. Beatrice turned her venomous gaze on me. Love? What would you know about love? Coming from this. She gestured dismissively at my parents' modest home. Ethan stepped between us. That's enough, Mom. We're leaving. As he ushered me towards the door, Beatrice called out, Don't forget about the reunion, Helen. I'll be expecting you all there. It's time we settled this once and for all. The drive home was silent, the weight of Beatrice's words hanging heavy between us. As we pulled into our driveway, I finally spoke. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. He cut me off with a gentle kiss. This isn't your fault, Jules, or your mom's. My mother, she's always been difficult, but I've never seen her like this. I leaned my head against his shoulder. What are we going to do? Ethan sighed. I don't know, but we'll figure it out together. As we walked into our house, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. I'm sorry for everything. Please let me explain. Dinner tomorrow? I showed Ethan the message and he nodded. We need answers. All of us. I typed a quick reply. We'll be there. It's time for the whole truth. As I hit send, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change dramatically. Whatever happened between our mothers in the past, it was clear that Beatrice wasn't going to let it go. And now, Ethan and I were caught in the crossfire of a decades-old feud. I looked at Ethan, seeing the worry in his eyes. No matter what happens, I said, squeezing his hand, we're in this together. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Together, he agreed. But as we settled in for the night, I couldn't help but wonder if our love would be strong enough to withstand the storm that was coming. The next evening, Ethan and I arrived at my parents' house, the air thick with anticipation. Mom greeted us with a strained smile, ushering us into the living room where Dad sat, his face etched with worry. It's time you knew everything, Mom began, her voice barely above a whisper. Beatrice, Thomas, and I were inseparable in high school, but Beatrice, she always wanted more. As Mom recounted the tale of their tumultuous past, I felt my heart sink. Thomas, the boy they both loved, had chosen my mother. Beatrice never forgave her. She swore she'd make me pay, Mom said, her eyes glistening. And now she's using you two to do it. Ethan's jaw clenched. This is insane. My mother can't possibly still be holding on to this grudge after all these years. Dad leaned forward, his expression grave. I'm afraid it's worse than that. We've heard rumors that Beatrice is trying to sabotage Julia's career at the gallery. My blood ran cold. What? How? Before anyone could answer, Ethan's phone buzzed. His face paled as he read the message. It's my father. He says Mom is on her way here. Now. Panic gripped me as we heard the screech of tires outside. Beatrice burst through the door, her eyes wild with fury. How dare you poison my son against me? She shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at my mother. Ethan stepped between them. Mom, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. Beatrice's laugh was bitter. Embarrassing myself? Your precious Julia is the spitting image of her conniving mother. Can't you see she's manipulating you, just like Helen did to Thomas? I felt my temper flare. That's enough. I love Ethan, and he loves me. This has nothing to do with you or your ancient grudge. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Oh, but it does. You think you've won, just like your mother did, but I won't let history repeat itself. She turned to Ethan, her voice suddenly soft. Darling, please, you can't marry her. She'll ruin you, just like her mother ruined Thomas. The room fell silent. I turned to Ethan, my heart pounding. Mary? Ethan's face flushed as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. This isn't how I planned to do this, but... He dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Julia, will you marry me? Tears sprang to my eyes as I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Ethan slipped the ring onto my finger, and we embraced, lost in our own world for a moment. Beatrice's enraged scream shattered our bubble of happiness. No, I forbid this. Ethan stood, his arm protectively around me. You can't forbid anything, Mom. I love Julia, and we're getting married. If you can't accept that, then you don't have to be part of our lives. Beatrice's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, both of you. I'll make sure of it. With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. In the stunned silence that followed, my mother approached us, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I hugged her tightly. No, Mom, this is Beatrice's doing, not yours. Ethan nodded, his expression determined. We won't let her come between us, any of us. As we stood there, our families united in the face of Beatrice's threat, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles. The ring on my finger, though beautiful, now felt like a target. What do we do now? I asked, looking at Ethan. His grip on my hand tightened. We fight. Together. As night fell, we made plans to confront Beatrice's schemes head-on. But deep down, I knew that our battle was far from over. Beatrice's vendetta had spanned decades. She wouldn't give up easily, and as I caught my reflection in the window, seeing my mother's features mirrored in my own, I realized that for Beatrice this wasn't just about the past. It was about destroying the future she felt she'd been denied. The morning after Ethan's proposal should have been filled with joy, but instead I woke to a frantic call from my father. Julia, it's gone. Everything's gone, he choked out. My heart raced as I rushed to dress. Dad, what are you talking about? The bookshop. We're bankrupt. I felt the floor drop out from under me. The family bookshop had been a cornerstone of our community for decades. How could this happen? Ethan drove us to the shop, his hand steady on mine. As we pulled up, I saw my parents standing outside, looking shell-shocked. The windows were dark, a stark, closed sign hanging on the door. I don't understand, I said, hugging my father tightly. How did this happen so suddenly? Mom's voice was bitter. It wasn't sudden. Someone's been working against us for months, canceling orders, spreading rumors about our financial stability. A chill ran down my spine. You don't think. Beatrice, Ethan finished, his jaw clenched. Before we could discuss further, my phone rang. It was the gallery director asking me to come in immediately. With a heavy heart, I left my parents, promising to return soon. At the gallery, I was met with chaos. Our star artist had pulled out of the upcoming show, citing concerns about the gallery's reputation. As I struggled to salvage the situation, a familiar voice cut through the noise. Such a shame, Beatrice purred, sauntering into my office. It seems misfortune follows your family wherever you go. I straightened, meeting her gaze. What do you want, Beatrice? Her smile was razor-sharp. To offer you a way out, of course. Break off this farce of an engagement with my son, and I'll make all of this. She waved her hand dismissively. Go away. You're behind this, I realized, fury building in my chest. The bookshop, the gallery. Beatrice shrugged elegantly. I merely pointed out some unfortunate truths to the right people. Your father's outdated business model, your questionable curatorial choices. I felt my hands shake with rage. You won't get away with this. Oh, but I already have, she said, leaning in close. Face it, Julia. You're not good enough for my son or this world. Do the right thing and walk away before you drag Ethan down with you. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. Oh, and Julia, I'd hate for anything to happen to your mother's reputation. It would be a shame if certain youthful indiscretions came to light. The threat hung in the air as she swept out, leaving me reeling. I sank into my chair, my mind racing. How could I fight against someone with so much power and so little conscience? My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Everything okay? You've been gone for hours. I stared at the screen, Beatrice's words echoing in my head. Was she right? Was I dragging Ethan into a world of problems he didn't deserve? With shaking hands, I typed out a response. We need to talk. It's important. As I hit send, I felt the weight of my decision crushing me. I loved Ethan more than anything, but could our love withstand the storm Beatrice was unleashing? And more importantly, did I have the right to ask him to weather it with me? I looked down at the engagement ring on my finger, its sparkle now seeming to mock me. In that moment, I knew I had to make a choice: fight for our love and risk everything, or give in to Beatrice's demands and lose the future I dreamed of. As I left the gallery, the sun setting on what felt like the longest day of my life, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead. Whatever I decided, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I paced our living room, waiting for Ethan to return from work. My mind raced with the day's events: the bookshop's bankruptcy, Beatrice's threats, and the looming decision I had to make. When Ethan finally walked in, his face etched with concern, I felt my resolve waver. "Jules, what's going on?" he asked, pulling me into a tight embrace. I took a deep breath. "Ethan, I think we need to postpone the wedding." His body stiffened. "Why?" As I recounted Beatrice's visit to the gallery and her ultimatum, Ethan's expression darkened. "We can't let her win, Julia. We can't let her dictate our lives." "But what about the bookshop? My parents have lost everything," I said, tears welling up. Ethan's eyes lit up suddenly. "Maybe not. Your dad called me earlier. He didn't want to get your hopes up, but he has a plan." Hope flickered in my chest as Ethan explained. Dad had been working on a new business model, a community-centered bookshop and cafe with space for local authors and artists. The bankruptcy, while devastating, could be a fresh start. "He's been keeping it quiet," Ethan said, worried that Beatrice might try to sabotage it if she found out. I felt a surge of pride for my father's resilience. "But how will he fund it?" Ethan squeezed my hand. "That's where we come in. I've been saving for a down payment on a house, but this is more important. We can invest in your dad's new venture." I was stunned by his generosity. "Ethan, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering," he said firmly. "We're a team, remember?" As we discussed the possibilities, a new determination filled me. We couldn't let Beatrice win, but how could we stop her vendetta once and for all? "We need to get to the root of this," I said. "The feud between our mothers has gone on long enough." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "What if we brought them together, forced them to confront the past?" An idea began to form. "The jazz fete next month. We could invite them both, create an opportunity for them to talk." "It's risky," Ethan warned. "It could backfire spectacularly." "But if it works," I countered, "we might finally have peace." As we brainstormed our plan, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Your father told me about his new idea. Are you sure about this investment?" I looked at Ethan, seeing the love and support in his eyes. "We're sure," I replied. Just then, Ethan's phone rang. His face paled as he answered. "Dad? What's wrong?" I watched as Ethan listened, his expression growing more troubled by the second. When he hung up, he looked shell-shocked. "My father's leaving my mother?" he said quietly. "He says he can't take her behavior anymore. He asked if he could stay with us for a while." The implications hit me like a tidal wave. Beatrice, alone and angry, would be more dangerous than ever. And now we'd be housing her estranged husband. "What do we do?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. Ethan took a deep breath. "We stick to the plan. We bring our mothers together at the jazz fete. But now we have even more reason to make it work." I nodded, a mix of fear and determination coursing through me. It's all or nothing now. As we settled in for the night, the weight of our decisions pressed down on us. We were risking everything, our families, our futures, our love, on this gamble. But as I looked at Ethan, I knew we had no choice. We had to fight for our happily ever after, no matter the cost. Tomorrow, we'd start preparing for the jazz fete. It would be our battleground, the place where years of resentment and manipulation would finally come to a head. And one way or another, our lives would never be the same again. The night of the jazz fete arrived, and my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Ethan and I had spent weeks planning this moment, hoping to finally bring our mothers face to face and end this decades-long feud. As we entered the elegantly decorated pavilion, the smooth sounds of jazz filled the air. I scanned the crowd, my heart racing when I spotted my mother, Helen, chatting with some old friends near the bar. "There's my mom," I whispered to Ethan. "Do you see Beatrice?" He shook his head, his brow furrowed. "Not yet. But she'll be here. She never misses a chance to show off." We made our way to Helen, who greeted us with a tight smile. "I still think this is a bad idea," she murmured. "Mom, please," I pleaded. "Just give it a chance." Before she could respond, a hush fell over the crowd. Beatrice had arrived, resplendent in a shimmering gown that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted us, and she made a beeline for our group. "Well, well," she drawled, her voice dripping with disdain. "What a quaint little gathering." Helen stiffened beside me. "Beatrice, you're looking, well." The tension was palpable as the two women faced each other for the first time in years. I held my breath, praying our plan would work. Suddenly, a booming voice cut through the awkward silence. "Helen, is that you?" We all turned to see Charles Worthington, a renowned philanthropist, approaching with a broad smile. "I haven't seen you since the last charity gala. Your work with the literacy program has been outstanding." Beatrice's jaw dropped as Charles continued to sing my mother's praises. "You know, Beatrice," he said, turning to her, "you really should get involved with Helen's initiatives. She's become quite the pillar of our community." I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as I watched Beatrice struggle to maintain her composure. This was exactly what we'd hoped for. A chance for my mother to shine, to show Beatrice that she wasn't the small-town nobody she'd always believed her to be. But just as I thought we might be making progress, Beatrice's eyes flashed with fury. "Oh, Charles," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "you're so kind to humor Helen's little projects, but surely you know about her sordid past?" My mother paled. "Beatrice, don't." "Did you know," Beatrice continued, raising her voice so others could hear, "that our dear Helen once—" "That's enough," Ethan's voice rang out, startling us all. "Mother, this ends now. Your vendetta against Helen, your attempts to sabotage Julia's career and her family's business, it stops here." Beatrice's face contorted with rage. "How dare you speak to me like that? I am your mother." "And Julia is my fiancée," Ethan shot back. "The woman I love. If you can't accept that, then you're the one who'll be left behind." The crowd around us had grown silent, all eyes on our family drama unfolding. I felt a mixture of pride and terror as Ethan stood up to his mother for the first time. Beatrice's gaze swept over all of us, landing finally on me. "You," she hissed. "You've turned my own son against me, just like your mother stole Thomas all those years ago." "No one stole anyone," Helen said quietly. "It's time to let go of the past, Beatrice." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, regret, pain in Beatrice's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by cold fury. "This isn't over," she spat, turning on her heel and storming out of the pavilion. As the crowd began to murmur and disperse, I felt my knees go weak. Ethan caught me, holding me close. "It's okay," he whispered. "We did it. We stood up to her." But as I looked at the faces around us, my shaken mother, the confused onlookers, and Ethan's determined expression, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. In fact, I feared we had just ignited a powder keg that threatened to explode and destroy everything we held dear. The aftermath of the jazz fete was like the calm before a storm. For days, an eerie quiet settled over our lives, but I knew Beatrice was plotting her revenge. I wasn't prepared for how swiftly and viciously it would come. It started with whispers. At the gallery, patrons would suddenly hush when I entered a room. At local cafes, I'd catch snippets of conversation. My mother's name, followed by hushed tones and sidelong glances. Then came the cancellations. Donors pulled out of upcoming exhibitions, citing concerns about the gallery's reputation. Artists I'd cultivated relationships with for years suddenly became unavailable. "It's Beatrice," Ethan said grimly one evening. "She's turning her social circle against us." I felt sick. How can she have so much influence? Before Ethan could answer, his phone rang. It was his father, Marcus. As Ethan listened, his face grew pale. He put the phone on speaker. "I had no idea how unhappy I've been," Marcus was saying. "Spending time with Helen and Pete, it's opened my eyes. The way Beatrice treats people, the constant manipulation, I can't do it anymore." My heart raced. Was Ethan's father leaving Beatrice? "Dad," Ethan said carefully, "what are you saying?" There was a heavy sigh on the other end. "I'm saying I want a divorce, and I'd like to stay with you and Julia for a while, if that's all right." The moment Marcus hung up, our doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother, tears streaming down her face. "Julia," she sobbed, "Beatrice, she's telling everyone about my past, things I've never even told you." As I held my weeping mother, the full weight of Beatrice's retaliation hit me. She wasn't just trying to ruin our reputations, she was tearing our families apart. The next few days were a blur of crisis management. We tried to counter Beatrice's rumors, but her influence ran deep. My father's plans for the new bookshop stalled as investors pulled out. The gallery board called an emergency meeting to discuss my future. Through it all, Ethan stood by me, fierce and unwavering. But I could see the toll it was taking on him. The strain of choosing between his fiancée and his mother, the pain of watching his family fracture. It all came to a head one rainy afternoon. I was at the gallery, pleading my case to the board, when Ethan burst in, his face ashen. "Jules," he said, his voice shaking, "it's your dad. He's in the hospital." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What? Why?" "Stress-induced heart attack," Ethan said softly. "Your mom's with him now." I felt my knees give way, and Ethan caught me before I could fall. As he held me, I saw Beatrice sweep into the room, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "I heard about your father, Julia. Such a shame. Perhaps if he hadn't been so ambitious with his little bookshop scheme, this wouldn't have happened." Something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the pain, all the anger I'd been holding back came rushing to the surface. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the gallery. "You've won, Beatrice. Is this what you wanted, to destroy everything and everyone around you?" Beatrice's smug expression faltered for a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like regret, but I was beyond caring. "I'm done," I said, my voice breaking. "You can have your social circle, your reputation, everything. Just leave us alone." I turned to Ethan, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be the reason your family falls apart." As I ran out of the gallery into the pouring rain, I heard Ethan calling my name. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because I knew if I did, I might not have the strength to do what I knew I had to do. To walk away from the man I loved, to save him from having to choose between his mother and me. In that moment, soaked to the bone and feeling more alone than ever, I realized that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the price of happiness is just too high. I stood outside the hospital, rain pelting my face, torn between rushing to my father's side and fleeing from the chaos Beatrice had unleashed. Suddenly, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. "Julia, wait!" Ethan's voice cut through the storm. He grabbed my arm, spinning me to face him. "You can't leave. Not now." "Ethan." No," he interrupted, his eyes blazing with determination. "We're not letting her win. Not this time." Before I could respond, Charles Worthington appeared, umbrella in hand. "Julia, Ethan, thank goodness I found you. There's something you need to see." Confused and wary, we followed Charles back into the hospital. To my shock, a crowd had gathered in the lobby, including many of Beatrice's high society friends. At the center stood Beatrice herself, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "What's going on?" I whispered to Ethan. Charles stepped forward, his voice ringing out. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've called you here because it's time the truth came to light." He produced a stack of documents. "These are records of bribes and blackmail Beatrice has been using to manipulate her social circle. She's been lying to all of you, using your secrets to control you." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Beatrice's face drained of color. "That's not all," Charles continued. "She's been sabotaging local businesses, including Julia's family bookshop, all in a misguided attempt to settle an old grudge." I watched in awe as Beatrice's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. Her friends turned away in disgust, whispering among themselves. Suddenly, Marcus pushed through the crowd. "Beatrice," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "I've filed for divorce. I can't be part of this toxicity any longer." Beatrice's eyes darted wildly, landing on Ethan and me. For a moment, I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Vulnerability. "Ethan," she pleaded, "you can't believe this. I did it all for you, to protect you from what, Mom?" Ethan asked softly. "From love? From happiness? Julia and her family have shown me more love and acceptance than you ever have." Beatrice crumpled, sobs racking her body. As much as I wanted to feel triumphant, I felt only pity. I stepped forward, surprising even myself. "Beatrice," I said gently, "it's over. The grudge, the manipulation, all of it. It's time to let go of the past." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how," she whispered. In that moment, I saw not the formidable woman who had tormented us, but a scared, lonely person clinging to old wounds. "We'll help you," I said, looking at Ethan, who nodded in agreement. But first, you need to make amends. Over the next few hours, a lifetime of secrets and resentments came pouring out. Beatrice apologized to Helen, to Marcus, to Ethan, and finally, to me. It wasn't easy, and I knew we had a long road ahead, but it was a start. As the storm outside subsided, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. My father was recovering, the truth was out, and our families, though battered, were beginning to heal. Ethan took my hand, leading me to a quiet corner. "Julia," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "after everything we've been through, I love you more than ever. Will you still marry me?" Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded, pulling him close. "Yes," I whispered, 1,000 times, "yes." In the days that followed, our community rallied around us. The gallery board reinstated me, investors returned to support my father's new bookshop venture, and even Beatrice, humbled and contrite, began the long process of making amends. As Ethan and I stood in front of our new home, a modest but warm house we'd chosen together, I realized that love truly could conquer all. Not just romantic love, but the love of family, of community, and of forgiveness. We had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and more united than ever. And as I looked at Ethan, at our families coming together to help us move in, I knew that this was just the beginning of our greatest adventure yet. The past no longer held us captive. We were free to write our own story, one filled with love, understanding, and the unbreakable bonds of family, both the ones we're born into and the ones we choose.